It was an exciting last day of school in late June 1993. I'd just graduated from grade 6 and was heading to high school, grade 7, in the fall. An impossibly long time in the future, which I put out of my head. The siege at the Mount Carmel compound in Waco, Texas had concluded in April, but the Branch Davidians were being discussed for some reason on the news that afternoon. I remember my dad's voice behind me as I stared at the angry vermilion orange sky on the TV, mesmerized by another apocalyptic color. The other was green from night vision footage of the Gulf War. He said, "Oh, those crazies down in Waco are in the news again." And Uncle Dave laughed his huge, booming belly laugh as the others talked about the trip. That day, my grandparents, Auntie Sherry, and Uncle Dave rolled into town from BC. My sister and I were the next ones to get home, and our parents got to our house soon thereafter. It was the day before we were to take our big trip to Italy. Dad, Uncle Dave, and Nono loaded the cars as soon as possible. I had no idea what to expect. I knew we'd be staying at my Nona's family estate, but I'd never been there before. I'd seen a few glimpses of the place in very old, jumpy Super 8 home movies, as they were then known, that had no audio, and watched them on a Bell and Howell projector and a screen. And they also had a handful of black and white photographs from just after the war years. "Do they have TV there, or is it just radio?" I asked, not out of petulance, but because all my life to that point I'd heard about how we had all the fancy furnishings of life in Canada and the States, and how there was a lack of these things in the old country, as my grandparents always called it. "Of course they do," Dad said, sounding irritated by my question. The flight was leaving Edmonton International at 8 in the morning. Dad worked in the aviation industry, and we'd learned a few things about air travel over the years. We'd memorized the itinerary at that point from sheer repetition. "International travel means we gotta get to the desk at least 2 hours early," he'd always said, indicating we'd need to arrive at the airport at around 5:30 so we could park and get sorted out. And that meant we were getting out of bed at around 3:30 a.m. because it was at least a 45-minute drive to the airport from our house. My sister and I were sent to bed early, even though nobody was interested in going to sleep. Not even Nono and Nona, which was refreshing to see. Nothing excited them, or so it seemed. My sister and I hung out together in her room, quietly listening to cassettes and wondering aloud what this strange new world we'd heard about would be like for real. In the family room below us, Mom, Dad, Auntie Sherry, and Uncle Dave practiced Italian phrases, laughing in an all too rare, uproarious way. "My favorite is still basta, and I think I'll need to know that one for sure," Uncle Dave boomed through the floor. I laughed to myself because that was one of the only words Uncle Dave knew in Italian, meaning stop. He meant it in the context of, "Stop giving me more food, I'm going to explode." I was mostly asleep when we got to the family home. It was the opposite of leaving Canada. We were all wide awake then, excited for a really long trip. It wasn't altogether smooth. We'd had a forced landing after a bird strike, and were made to wait for another liner for several hours. Before leaving Canada, though, Nona, ever the seasoned traveler, went to the airport bar for a double shot of whiskey and took Gravol as well to ensure she slept on the flight as much as possible. I wished I'd done the same, quite honestly, because when we got to our destination, she was a dynamo full of rest and ready to see everyone she missed so much. Well played, Nona. Well played. The next day after arriving, I woke up. Everyone else was still asleep after the big reception. The house was quiet but for the snoring. I had to go to the bathroom, but I remembered being told before I completely lost consciousness the day before that the toilet wasn't plumbed in the big house, and I'd have to go to the small barn to use theirs. It rained a little at some point. The ground outside was unpaved, and someone had put planks down on the clay-like ground to walk on. I could smell wood, concrete, and clay. There were songbirds on the roof. Things I couldn't have imagined from black and white photos. As quietly as possible, I went outside. It was an overcast, early morning, but I had no idea what time it was. The big house was under construction and had no clocks. The front doors were heavy to push open on both the big house and the barn house. I walked the planks across the central courtyard, hearing and smelling this place. As I got closer to the barn house, I heard goings-on in the kitchen. I opened the door, already feeling self-conscious, as this was not socially appropriate behavior in my experience up to that point, unless the house was your own. Zia Luigina was awake, straightening up and preparing for the continued festivities. I felt like giving my Italian social graces a try. I opened the door just a crack, saying, "Permesso," as I knocked lightly. This was the custom here. Even if the front door was open and you knew the residents, it was impolite to not ask for permission or permesso to enter. She heard me or the groaning door hinges, I'm not sure which, and poked her head around the corner from the kitchen. "Dove il bagno?" I asked, not knowing at all where the bathroom was and growing more desperate in that department. Zia pointed for me to turn to my immediate right, and there it was. "Grazie tanto," I said, hurrying. I was wide awake at that point, so I wandered into the kitchen afterwards. "Ho dimenticato se non as tu?" Zia asked. Zia Luigina rarely used real Italian, as they called it. She almost exclusively used the local dialect of Friulian to speak and write. I had to scan my exceptionally limited vocabulary in this unique language before recognizing she was asking, "I forgot, what's your name?" Up to that point in Canada, my grandparents put more emphasis on real Italian instead of this slang, so I could only respond very formally by comparison. "Mi chiama Daniela. Come ti chiami?" I had to follow up with, "What's your name?" because I'd not been introduced. "Soy Luigina," she said, gesturing for me to come through to the small couch in the corner. "Veux-tu un café?" she asked, and I smiled, an easily recognizable phrase this time. I felt so grown up to be offered a coffee like that. She made me a latte on the stove, just the way my parents did for themselves on Saturdays. I was then distracted by the music video on the TV, which was impressively large compared to ours in Canada. "Ti place la musica?" she asked, pointing at the screen. I was reading the small text in the lower corner, where the artist name, song, album, and record label appeared. It was a new Robert Plant song from his album Fate of Nations, called "I Believe." The song's opening is a sarangi, an instrument from South Asia. It's an obscure chordophone that looks like the top of a cello crossed with a guitar. I immediately loved it. "Sì, mi piace la musica," I answered back, using the more formal diction again. Up to that point, I'd spent all of my time with Italians in Canada who understood English. It didn't matter if I didn't know a word because I could just say it in English and be understood. Not so with Zia Luigina. I had to listen and plan responses carefully, reverse engineering, much like Dad with the flight itinerary. Meanwhile, I heard the opening lyrics to this song. Tears, tears at the water's edge. Hey, little sister, give us laughter instead. Tears for the teacher, from the eyes for her soul. This restless spirit takes a long way back home. Like the wind, you are free. Just a whisper, I hear you, so talk to me. Oh, I believe, I do I. Say, brothers, sisters, see your brothers in the sky. Neighbor, neighbor, don't be so cold. It's only glory from a story untold. I knew there were many stories untold in this old country that suddenly didn't feel old to me. Here we were in the present, 1993, and the others would be waking up soon. I've been Danielle Walker. It's nice to meet you.